Hey guys, today we're in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 3. We are in these first 3 chapters of Moses retelling the story to the second generation of Israel. What have your parents gone through? And so they started in Egypt and is now taking us all the way to exactly where they are at this time. And so yesterday they walked around Edom, they walked around Moab, they walked around Ammon, but they defeated the king Sihon, one of the kings of the Amorites. And today they come against another king, and that is the king of Og. And so he is also another Amorite king, a great Amorite king. And so it says, and they turned and went up to the way of Bashan, going up, which means they're getting closer to the promised land. But the Lord said to me, do not fear him, for I have given him and all of his people and his land into your hand. The Lord has already told Moses, don't worry about him. Everything's going to be okay. I'm going to take care of him. So the Lord our God gave into our hands Og, also the king of Bashan, and all of his people, and we struck down, and we had no survivor left. And we took all of his cities, about 60 cities. And so here we see God said, I'm going to do this, and God does that. So now, if you think of like a map, the promised land is right here. Israel is right here, okay? You think of Edom, Moab, Ammon, and now you have the Amorite territory. It's right across from Israel. And now Israel is defeating Sihon and Og, this 2 kings that are a monster conglomeration of a country, right? And so they're wiping them out. So all of the people inside the promised land directly across the river from them, what's happening? We learned yesterday their hearts are filling with fear. God is giving them something to be fearful about and letting them know who Israel is and who the God of Israel is. And so they go to defeat him. I love this in verse 11. 11 is just a little neat kind of like a blip that a lot of people don't remember, but it just adds to the story. Verse 11, it says this, for only Og, the king of Bashan, was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. That's the giants, right? Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Okay, now we got to stop here for a second. Some people say his bed means his sleeping bed. Others say that it's his coffin, okay? We really don't know which is which. I tend to believe that it was his coffin, because beds were not what beds are today. But either way, it doesn't matter. But his bed was made of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Amorites? And notice what it says. It was 9 cubits in length and 4 cubits in breadth. It was 14 feet long and 6 feet wide. So whether that's his bed or whether that's his coffin, I believe it's his coffin, it tells us how big this man really was. So when we read biblical stories about the giants, 14 feet by 6 feet, he was a mammoth of a man, right? But notice, he was a giant and the Lord still killed him. It sets you up for another story that will come of a little shepherd from Israel that will stand against another giant one day. And so when we took his possessions of the land, I gave it to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. And so remember, this is on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and we already read in Numbers where the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh came into this and said, man, this is nice. We don't need to go to the promised land. We'll take this land, right? And remember, in Numbers 32, Moses strikes a deal with them. God strikes a deal. Moses is just the mouthpiece that says, here's the deal. You can stay on this side, but you still got to go to the promised land. All of your men have to go, and they're going to be our professional soldiers, and they're going to help us win over the promised land. And when we win over the promised land and we take it all over, then you can come back, right? So this is the rethinking, the retelling of that matter, right? So they're there. But notice from verses 12 to verses 16, how many times God says, I gave, I gave, I gave, I gave, right? Showing that this land is not their land, it is God's land. It is all controlled by God. Verse 18, and I commanded you at this time, saying, the Lord your God has given you into this land to possess. All your men of valor shall cross over armed with your brothers, right? That's that deal we was talking about in Numbers 32. Moses is showing the new generation he remembers the deal. Right? He remembers the deal. And he says that they're going to go over the promised land, and when all that land has been divided, then each one of you may return. And then in verse 21, we see that God commanded, Moses was commanded by God to commission Joshua. And to what? Tell him not to fear, because it is the Lord your God who fights for you. This is based on a promise, right? You don't fear because God is going before you. If you have faith in God, you will not fear, right? And that's why so many times in the book of Joshua, we see God reminding Joshua to fear not, because he's already promised him. And what God promises will always be true. God will keep his promise. He is not a promise breaker. He is a promise keeper. And so Joshua stands up and he becomes kind of the new leader. And now in verse 23, and we see a new part that we have not seen before in this last story of Moses. And I pleaded with the Lord at that time, saying, O Lord your God, you began to show your servants, please let me go over and see the good land. Verse 26, and the Lord was angry with me because you would not listen to me, and the Lord told me, enough from you. Moses was asking God to change his mind about sin. Moses had sinned, right? He hit the rock twice, showing that he had not enough faith in God, and he was taking the credit on himself. He sinned. All right, as a leader, he sinned, and God punished that sin. That punishment is he could not go in the promised land. Now, as time has passed, Moses is pleading over and over and over with God to go in the promised land, right? But if he was to go in the promised land, that means that God would have to overlook sin. It means that the holy God would have to become near unholy sin. Now we've learned in the book of the book of Leviticus, that cannot happen. Holy and unholy must be separated, and this is the separation. And because Moses was not understanding that, God was angry. He was asking God to not be God, right? Of allowing sin to come in to his holiness. And God was angry, and he said, enough. And he told him to go on top of Pisgah, that is Mount Nebo, or right next to Mount Nebo, and lift your eyes westward, northward, and see, and you can see the promised land, but you shall not go over the Jordan. But charge Joshua, encourage Joshua, strengthen Joshua, because he will go over and he will put them in possession of the land. He's telling Moses to look at the promised land, to encourage Joshua, because Joshua will be the one that will fulfill what God has been doing. He will be the one that brings Israel into the possession of the land. And so what's interesting is on these videos that we're doing in Deuteronomy, that is a real picture from the top of Pisgah, where we're talking about where Moses looked out and he saw the promised land. This is a picture that me and Laura took just a few months ago. So the Deuteronomy title slide on these videos, take a look. It's kind of interesting. But here, once again, you'd say, where is Jesus in this? Well, I think we see Jesus where we saw him yesterday, and that he provides, he gives us everything that we need. But more importantly, today we see that God and Moses, there was sin, right? There was an issue in between them. And so they could not come together. There had to be separation. But it was when God sent his son Jesus to die on a cross, to be the ultimate sacrifice, that he would take away that sin so that they could come back together, so that there didn't have to be separation, because sin was fully atoned for. And so that just brings Jesus a little bit into the book of Deuteronomy. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. And tomorrow in chapter 4, we'll kind of start moving forward in what Moses has to say to this new generation, kind of his last words to the new generation of Israel. Hope this makes sense. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless.